All right, welcome to the replay. And for those of you joining me live, welcome. All right, let me turn down this music. Okay, my name is Joe McCullough, and today we're going to be talking about brain rules for students and for educators. What do we know about the brain? How as a student you can learn that to learn more effectively? How as a teacher you can use that information to teach more effectively? This is a 4-part series. I've already done part 1. Nice hat, thank you. I've already done part 1 going through the first 3, but let me give you a little recap. And in fact, time for a recap. Actually, this keeps catching the light, but I'll come back to this. So what we're talking about is Brain Rules by Dr. John Medina. If you haven't read this book yet, it's a phenomenal book. I've read it a couple times. He's got another great book called Brain Rules for Babies, which any expectant parent should. Wisconsin on, woohoo, welcome to Wisconsin. So again, I'm kind of using the book Brain Rules by Dr. John Medina as a framework to talk about different things we know about the brain and how you can use that as teachers to teach more effectively. Brazil, welcome. And as students to learn more effectively. Let me give you a very fast introduction. My name is Dr. Joe McCullough. I'm the physics program chair at Cabrillo College in Santa Cruz, California. I'm also a best-selling author of Accelerated Learning Techniques for Students and a speaker and trainer. And I made a 1-year commitment to get on Periscope every single day for a year, sharing daily doses of dopamine through education, entertainment, and inspiration. Today is about a little bit of education and inspiration. So, Brain Rules by Dr. John Medina. What do we know about the brain? Brain rule number 1 is exercise boosts brain power. Exercise boosts brain power. What I talked about is numerous studies have shown the link between aerobic exercise and increased mental and cognitive abilities. As a student, what you want to think about is getting aerobic exercise at least twice a week, 30 minutes at a time. And in fact, 3 times a week is better. Exercise has been shown to not only have beneficial effects on the body, obviously, but also tremendous benefits mentally. You increase your memory, cognitive abilities, reasoning abilities, fluid thinking skills. Anything that we can test as important as a student, exercise has shown to be beneficial. Another thing you can do as a student, and you may not have thought about this, think about getting some aerobic exercise before any kind of quiz or exam. If you have the time, get your body moving. What that's going to do is increase blood flow to the brain. More blood flow to the brain, always a good thing. Now, as a teacher, what can you do? Obviously, it's hard as a teacher to make sure your students get exercise, but I think about getting my students moving whenever possible. So if I'm teaching an 80, 90-minute class, I might try and have my students stand up at least once or twice and do just a quick 10 or 15 second stretch. So exercise by morning. Ideally, if you had the time, I would highly recommend exercising about 30 minutes before you are about to take an exam, but exercise the morning before some kind of big mental outpouring like during a final exam or test or quiz, good thing. Okay. Brain rule number 2 is the brain evolved too. What I talked about here is the fact that we really have 3 brains in one that have evolved over time. We have the lizard brain, and that controls all of our automatic things like heartbeat and temperature, things like that. But the important thing for the brain stem, the lizard brain, is that it controls our freeze, fight, or flight response. Second part of the brain we have is the mammal brain, also called the limbic system. Big key role in memory and emotions. And then the third brain we have is the human brain. So what I talked about in this is our higher order thinking skills in our prefrontal cortex virtually shut down anytime we feel emotions such as fear, anxiety, stress, or threat. Any negative emotions shut down the learning process. So as a student, you always want to think about attaching positive emotions to learning, but more importantly, never sit down to study, never sit down to do work if you're feeling in a negative emotional state. Your time is better well spent first getting in the optimal mental, emotional, and physical state before you do any work. And I mentioned this, let's say I had a 3-hour exam. If I was feeling anxious or stressed, I would, as a student, spend 10 or 15 minutes making sure I'm in the optimal state before I go and take the exam. That 10 or 15 minutes is going to have a huge beneficial effect for the rest of the time. What I talked about as a teacher is purposely creating what I call home court advantage. You want your students, as soon as they walk in the classroom, to feel like this is a place they belong, makes them feel safe, and it makes sure that their brain is receptive to anything that you have to teach them. Now, I'll do a much longer scope on creating home court advantage because it's huge as a teacher. Some of the things I do are, and I mentioned this before, hey there, Felipe, welcome. Anytime I grade, I'm always grading in green ink. Red, seeing a bunch of red X's on a paper, very intimidating for a student. So as a teacher, always grading in green ink. I teach college physics, and yet I still give stickers. And my students love stickers. So anytime they do well on a quiz or a celebration, aka exam, I give them a sticker. And you'd be amazed at just how excited they are to actually get stickers. Being safely attached is so big for learning. We need to feel safe to learn. Yes. Thank you, Becca. And I also mentioned I learned all of my students' names the very first week of classes. I did a scope about how I did that, but students love to hear their own name, and the fact that I learned all their names and I took time out of my weekend to learn their names totally makes them feel special. I also have a bunch of props I use. Anytime I'm referring to the brain, I got my little brain prop. I start each class with my recap. So I wear this hat. This is my recap. I spend the first 5 minutes of every class recapping what we did in the previous day. Validation and recognition. Yes. Also, that was easy.
That was easy.
I love this. Anytime a student asks a great question or we do a challenging problem that students finally get.
That was easy.
And they also have these buttons that you can record your own.
Physics rules!
Let me play that again.
Physics rules!
So sometimes what I'll do is I'll have a little bin where they hand in their homework, and I have a little thing that says press a button, and I give them a little message as they're turning in their homework. Okay, brain rule number 3 is every brain is wired differently. So important things about this is no two people learn exactly the same way. As a student, think about how much time you spent in school learning different subjects. Think about how much time you've spent learning how you learn best. You should teach other teachers this. I do. I have been training teachers for the last 4 or 5 years. I hold fun shops, which I like to call workshops, about all sorts of brain-related information, and I'm going to start doing more scopes specifically designed for teachers. Okay, so every brain is wired differently. What does this mean as a student? As a student, think about spending some time learning how you learn best. Do you teach in California? Yes, I teach in Santa Cruz, California at Cabrillo College, and it's a great community college right outside of Santa Cruz, and I teach physics there. I would enjoy your classes. What school are you? So Cabrillo College, if you need to take physics, you want to take it from me because I have been thinking about how to teach, given what we know about the brain for many years. I love the brain. Okay, every brain is wired differently. So as a student, think about learning how you learn best. As a teacher, think about teaching using different modalities. If you only teach one way, you're going to be losing a fraction of your students. Anytime I do a little recap at the beginning of class, I'm always trying to recap the material in a slightly different way than I presented it the day before. I'm always thinking about incorporating visual, auditory, kinesthetic strategies into my lessons. Quick little plug, at joemccullough.com. I have a weekly blog, and I've got lots of great information on accelerated learning techniques. And if you check out my YouTube channel, I have a recent scope. I archive all my scopes, recent scopes specifically for teachers called Make Your Message Memorable. What we know about the brain and how you can use that to make sure the information is stored in long-term memory. Okay, so now on to brain rules 4, 5, and 6. If you're just tuning in, talking about brain rules by Dr. John Medina, things we know about the brain and how teachers can use them to teach more effectively and students to learn more effectively. Rule number 5. Hey, Wine Tom, welcome. Hearts for a great scope. Thank you, Becca. Rule number 4. People don't pay attention to boring things. People don't pay attention to boring things. If you have information and you want it to be remembered long term, it has to be interesting. It has to capture the attention of our students. A couple things about this. So one, you want to make sure that every 10 or 15 minutes, what was that? People don't pay attention to boring things. Every 10 or 15 minutes, you want to be doing something to grab your students' attention. You want to hook them. Dr. John Medina, in his book Brain Rules, talks about the 10-minute rule. And he's saying, as a teacher, he's always thinking about every 10 minutes, what is the hook? What is going to grab my students' attention? So for me, every 10 minutes, I have my students doing something where they are getting actively involved. I might have them turn around, give somebody a high five, give somebody a knuckle bump. I may have them get up and stretch their bodies. I may do a clicker question or even just an unexpected magic trick. Something that totally gets their attention, their focus shifts, and now I have their undivided attention for about 10 minutes, maybe 15, and then it starts to wander again. So as a student, what do you want to think about? Another thing mentioned in this chapter about people don't pay attention to boring things is no multitasking. The brain does not multitask when you're thinking about learning multiple things at the same time. It doesn't happen. What happens is your brain is constantly shifting focus from one thing to another, and then another, and then back, and then this, and then back. Your brain is not simultaneously thinking and focusing on two things at once. What it's doing is it's shifting focus. And every time you shift focus, you lose a little bit of productivity. What some studies have suggested is that every time that you try and do something when you're multitasking and your attention is split, you're 50% less productive and you make as much as 50% more mistakes. Personal example, as a teacher, I love teaching, but I hate grading. Sometimes I will choose to grade with a movie on in the background, but I know if I do that, then it's going to take me probably twice as much time as if I just focus and grade without anything down. Yes, anytime you shift, it slows things down, it makes more mistakes. So as a student, think about no multitasking. If you really need to study and get stuff into your long-term memory, think about getting rid of external distractions, focusing. And then as a teacher, think about the 10-minute rule. You have 10 minutes to keep your students' attention. After that, their attention starts to wane. Every 10 minutes, you want some kind of hook. You want to hook your students' attention. Could be a simple little magic trick. It could be an upbeat song. It could be a personal story. Get them moving. Get them excited. Capture their attention.
That was easy.
That was easy. Okay, and rule number 5 and rule number 6 are actually the same, but the chapters talk about short-term and long-term memory. Rule number 5 is repeat to remember. Longer but more enjoyable. Repeat to remember. So a big thing in this chapter is spaced learning. I call it spaced repetition. And it says this: if you really want to learn something and have it stick, you cannot cram knowledge. Just like if you were training for a marathon, you can't train for a marathon overnight. It takes months and months and months of training. Same thing is true for the brain. What ends up happening is every time you read, I used to use loud music not as a distraction, but to mask out background noise so I could focus. Oh, wine time. Thank you for saying that. What I suggest to my students is if you're going to use music, research has shown that Baroque music, which is a specific genre of classical music, is one of the best types of music. It helps get the brain into an optimal brainwave state called alpha state. But even when I do suggest they use it, I suggest they use it as background music that's barely audible. What you don't want is your brain to constantly be shifting from what you're studying to the music, to what you're studying to the music. And if you listen to music with lyrics, then there's a part of your brain that's going to be listening to the lyrics. It's going to cut down on your overall productivity. Okay, so back to repeat to remember. What you want to think about both as a student and a teacher is spaced repetition. If you really want something to stick, you have to learn it long term. I teach my students that it's better to study 4 times for a half hour at a time spread out than 3 hours in a single sitting. If you think about that, that's like a savings of 50% on your time. So rather than spending 3 hours studying in a single night, the night before an exam, if you study a half hour one night, then another half hour, then another half hour, then another half hour, not only will you remember more, but it'll be more deeply stored in your long-term memory. As a musician, I pay attention to the music. Yes, for me, I used to study and stuff to classical music, but even then, once I learned a classical piece well enough, I could no longer use that same song because I would start to follow the melody in my head. So now what I like to do is I like to use Pandora, and I'll put it on a Baroque station or a classical station, and since I'm always getting different songs, for me that's a lot more effective. But again, all of this is personal. The only way to know how well it works for you is to try it and see what works best for you. Everybody learns differently, even music. I know some students who swear by studying rock and roll. Research shows that that's not true, but everybody learns slightly differently. I experienced the opposite, so there's a case. There are some people that really hate classical music, and playing it even low can be a distraction. Like I said, there's some students I know that swear by studying to rock and roll. I let students listen to music if they want during quizzes and celebrations, even though I don't suggest it. And there's some people that like to listen to just upbeat rock and roll, and, to each their own. I can't concentrate if I'm listening to music. If I really need to focus on something, I can't have music playing that's not low, Baroque, some kind of classical music. Okay, rule number 6 is, again, repeat to remember, but this time we're thinking about long-term memory. This is a fascinating chapter. One of the things this thing goes through is that what we think of as long-term memory is not set in stone. Our memories are pliable. And in fact, every time you recall a fact, what research is now showing is that you're storing it again as if it's brand new. So every time you remember something, it's actually pliable. And the thing about this is you take, how did I state this? You take present knowledge, and sometimes present knowledge bleeds into old memories. So if I recall something, I could actually remember it differently over time as I have new experiences. And so what this means as a student, why is it after exams we tend to forget major parts of the syllabus? The big answer to that, actually let me touch on rule 6 and then I'll come back to that. So as a student, you really want to be careful how you practice and what you practice, because I've had students that knew the material, I taught it really well, and they go home and they study in an ineffective way, and they may even destroy that knowledge. Not like it's destroyed, but memory is pliable, and every time you're studying, you want to make sure that you're studying in such a way that you're reinforcing the concepts that you're trying to learn. And it's possible that you could actually create that memory in a different way than was originally remembered. So, rule 6 and 5 are both repeat to remember. So back to studying, why is it some people tend to forget the material right after quiz or exam? Simple fact is use it or lose it. Eventually memories start to fade and they have to be constantly reinforced. And let me tell you, I've been teaching physics for 15 years, but if I haven't taught a particular class, like if I haven't taught circuits in 5 or 6 years, I still have to review some of the material. There's certain equations that if I haven't used in 6 years, it's just a natural tendency of the brain to start to prune and start to get rid of old knowledge that it doesn't see as useful anymore. So I've also talked about memorizing my students' names. I spend a ton of time memorizing my students' names, but I tend to forget them after a couple of years. So if I see a student walking downtown and I haven't taught them in 3 or 4 years, I may forget their name. And that doesn't mean anything about memory, it's just use it or lose it. So as a student, if there's something you want to remember long term, you still have to continue to expose yourself to it even after the exam is done. So one of the things I recommend in my book is setting up what's called sort of review days. So once a month, you spend a few hours where you're just reviewing old material from a year or two ago. And it doesn't have to be an in-depth review. It's just exposing yourself to the information spaced out, and eventually it starts to stick. And I'll go through the whole brain science behind that. It's a little, do you use memory palaces? Great question. The answer is yes, a little bit. So for people that don't know what it is, a memory palace is a memory technique where you can use a visual image of, let's say, your house to help memorize things. So my house, everybody has a typically really good visual memory for how things in their house are arranged. So as soon as I walk in my front door, I've got my bathroom to the right, I've got my TV to the left, and if I needed to memorize things in order, I could start to place things that I want to memorize on different objects in my house. So let's say I was creating a shopping list, and the very first thing I wanted to buy was a block of cheese. Well, I might imagine walking in my house, turning left, and right on front of my TV, there's a giant thing of melty cheese. And what I would do is walk around the house in my brain, coming to each successive room, and then creating some kind of visual image for something I wanted to buy, let's say in a shopping list. It's a really great technique, and if you've never read the book Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Fourier, great book. And one of the things I got out of this book is memory. Nobody's born with a great memory or a poor memory. It's just a trained memory or an untrained memory. The guy who wrote this book was a reporter who was reporting on the World Memory Championships. He got inspired to try and enter the United States one, thinking he didn't have a good memory, and after training for a year, he won the U.S. Memory Championships. And he goes all through the different strategies they use. One of the big ones is Memory Palace. Okay, every time I do these, I meant for these to be like 5 or 10 minutes scopes, but they always end up to be a bit longer. And thank you for all the hearts. Let me give you a fast little recap, and then I will continue with steps or rules 7, 8, and 9 tomorrow. Have you read Harry Lorraine? Which book do you like? Yes, I do. The classic book is, I think it's just called The Memory Book. It's funny that I can't remember the name of the memory book. But there they go through a lot of it. Let me just say the key to memory is visual. About half of our brain's resources are spent processing, storing, and analyzing visual data. Most memory techniques take into account creating some kind of crazy visual image that's easy for the brain to actually store. Okay, so we've been talking about brain rules by Dr. John Medina. I'm going through all 12 brain rules 3 at a time and giving you some insights about how teachers and students can use this information. The very first brain rule, exercise boosts brain power. Rule number 2 is the human mind evolved 2, the human brain evolved 2. We have kind of 3 brains in one. Rule number 3 is every brain is wired differently. No 2 people learn exactly the same way. So as a student, think about taking some time to learn how you learn best. As a teacher, think about always teaching the same material in different ways. Brain rule number 4 is people don't pay attention to boring things. You have about 10 minutes to keep your students focused if you're a teacher. After that, attention starts to drop off. Think about doing something to get your students' attention about every 10 minutes. And then rules number 4 and 5 are the same. Repeat to remember. One chapter deals with short-term memory, one chapter deals with long-term memory. But if you really want something to stick long-term, you need to be exposed to it gradually, spaced out in time. I think about the fact that 4 spaced out half-hour study sessions gives you more benefit than 1 3-hour study session. Okay, that's much longer than I meant to go on. I want to pause for a minute or 2 and see if there are any questions I can answer. While I'm waiting for a question, give you a quick little bio one more time. My name is Joe McCullough. I'm the physics program chair at Cabrillo College in Santa Cruz, California. I'm also a best-selling author of Accelerated Learning Techniques for Students and founder of JoeMcCullough.com. I made a commitment to get on Periscope every day for a year and share daily doses of dopamine through education, entertainment, and inspiration. Today is day 43. Only exception I'm going to make are those days when I'm backpacking and have no Wi-Fi signal. Do you know of Jonathan Levi or Anthony Mativier, podcasters on learning? I do not know about them, Becca, but I will have to check them out. I'm always looking for interesting new resources. Okay, if there are no questions, then I'm going to sign out for today. Thanks, Doc. Good material. Thank you so much, Cannon Farm. Hi, Joe. April from Elkton here. Hey, April. Welcome. My old digs, Elkton, Maryland. Oh, and I forgot I haven't sent those bracelets out yet. So for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I'm doing a 1-year no complaint experiment. I just gave these out to my students. Not 1 year, did I say 1 year? I'm doing a 21-day no complaint. How do I get my book published? So one more thing as a little future scope. I wrote one book. I'm not an expert, but I spent a lot of time researching Amazon and what it takes to become a bestseller. And I have a technique that basically will almost guarantee that you get on the Amazon bestseller list. My book hit #1 in study skills and then #1 in study skills in 7 countries total. And it's pretty easy. As long as you have a book and you have some friends that are willing to buy the book, you can almost guarantee that you're going to get at least in the top 100 in one of the categories. Okay, so I missed a bunch of questions. If there's any questions, I'll stay on for like another minute. Anything about the brain, how people learn, how we can use what we know about the brain to learn more effectively. If not, then I'll see you guys tomorrow, and I'll do brain rules 7, 8, and 9. You're a rock star, Doc. Thank you, Becca. You're a rock star, too. All right, if there's nothing else, my name is Joe. If you've enjoyed this, please follow me. Feel free to share this to your followers and on Twitter. Thank you so much, Dr. Joe. This is fascinating. Carol from Canada, thank you so much. I hope to see you tomorrow. All right, have a wonderful evening. Hopefully tomorrow I'm going to have a new iPhone and sometime soon. Cool hat, thank you. I'm going to have internet connection back at home. I love Comcast. I do, really. Love the hat. All right, April, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting your follows. And I will send out those bracelets sometime soon. And then I'll be doing an entire series on the 21-day no complaint experiment. All right, that is it for today. Thank you so much. I hope to catch you all tomorrow.